This video is going to give some highlights about citing in Turabian style. Let me begin by saying if you are watching this video on one of my classes, you do not have to specifically use Turabian unless I've told you that you have to. If you're in a freshman or sophomore level class, if it's a 100 or 200 level class, in other words, although we encourage you to use Turabian, I do not require it. You do have to cite, but it doesn't have to be in Turabian. You could use MLA or APA if you want. Check the assignment instructions to be sure. In general, remember that we always put a parenthetical citation for anything that we put, even when it's in our own words. And so this is the form that Turabian wants. This is the form I expect to see. It is the last name of the author, no punctuation, the year, a comma, and the page number. Now, if you are summarizing something, if you're summarizing an entire section or an entire chapter, you don't need a page number. You always need a page number for a direct quote, and paraphrases are somewhere in between. Page numbers are preferred for paraphrases, but they aren't always strictly required. So here are two examples of books I had laying next to my desk as I was working on this. So again, author's last name, year of publication, then a comma, then the page number. If it's more than one page number, you would put a dash or a hyphen and then the next one after it. So 207 to 208, 213 to 214. If you're paraphrasing or direct quoting, you shouldn't do it for more than 2 page numbers in a row. You can't paraphrase an entire chapter in one sentence. It is okay, though, if you're paraphrasing repeatedly from the same chapter to have your citation at the end of the paragraph and maybe not to have page numbers in that case. If you have a book with 2 authors, it's both of their last names. So this book happens to have the same last name, both authors, so Brace and Brace. Year, comma, page number. 3 authors, last name, and last name. Notice there's a comma. Hayes, comma, Vroman, comma, and Iverson, space, year of publication, comma, space, page number. Only if there are 4 or more authors, 4, 5, 6, 7 or more, do you use the phrase et al., which means et alia in Latin. In some other styles, you may have learned to italicize this because it does come from Latin. Turabian does not italicize it, so it should not be italicized. Sometimes you've also may have been taught to put a comma before it. Turabian does not do that. So it should look just like this. This is a history book with 4 authors. So the last name of the first author, put the names always in the order that they appear on the first page of the book or the title page of the book. Year, comma, and a page number. So you always, no matter what, need to know the authors of whatever you are writing about, whether it is an article, a book, or something else. If there is no author, you will use the name of the sponsoring organization. If it's something like, one example in the Turabian book is the privacy policy for Google. So if you go on to google.com and find their privacy policy, there's no author listed. You would list that as being Google as the author. If you find something at your college, probably on the college website, you would put the college's name as the author. That is an institutional or an organizational author. If that is also not available, then you would use the title in place of the author. But normally you will have an author. You should have an author. That should be a goal that you're going to, the sources that you use should be quality sources, so you probably are going to have an author involved. So other things you need to record besides the author. If it's a book, you need the year it was published in. That's just the copyright date. Go to the inside of the book and look it up. If it's not the first edition, there's probably a whole bunch of copyright dates listed. Use the most recent one. The title and any subtitle of the book. the book's publisher, the first city listed in the United States for the publisher. That's the place of publication. And then if it's not the first edition, what edition is it? So second edition, fourth edition, revised edition, anything like that. If it is the first edition, you just ignore that part. For journals, you need, besides the authors, the year, the journal title, the article title and subtitle if it has one, the volume of the journal, the number of the journal, the page numbers of the article, and the issue date. Let's look at an example. Oh, sorry, and the DOI or URL. The DOI, again, is something, the document, something information, document origination information, maybe. It is, it's now formatted similarly to URL to try to help find journal articles. But let's look at an example. So here's the first page of a journal article that I downloaded for a class that I was writing a paper about a few years ago. So this was found from one of the databases in a library database. And so what we see here is some of the information that we would need. So what do we have here? We have two authors, author 1, author 2. We have the title of the article, the title of the journal, and then the volume number. This means this is sort of what year of publication it is. So this particular volume 25 means this was the 25th year, basically, that this journal was published. And then the issue number is the issue for that year. So this particular journal has 4 or 6, something like that, issues a year. This is telling us it's the second issue of the year. You need a date if one is given. So here, March is given as the actual date. You're going to need that also. You need the page range as well for the article. When you find an article in a PDF format, that's the best format to use, and you should always look for that when you're looking online. Because when you cite the article, the page numbers are going to be the same as they were in the original. Like you see here, there's page 118, page 119, and so on. And those page numbers don't depend on what your monitor's resolution is. Do not just print an article out and then use those page numbers. That won't work. That will be wrong. That will be very wrong. This article is old, so it doesn't have a DOI. It has instead what's called a stable URL. So URLs, as you might know, can change. They can become outdated. You could get an error that it's not available anymore. A stable URL is intended to always be accessible. So if I clicked on this URL now, if I were in an institution that had a subscription to the JSTOR database, I would go immediately to that article. You might have been taught in the past that you need the access date, the date when you access the article. You do not need that for journal articles in Turabian format, but you do for web pages. And we'll look in a little bit about what this looks like in actually a references page. Magazines and newspapers are very similar to journals. You actually need a few less things. We like journals more than magazines and newspapers in academic writing. You need the year, the date, the title of the magazine or the newspaper. If it's a newspaper and it's unclear where it's from, you can also include that in parentheses at an appropriate spot. The article title, and if it's either a print magazine or newspaper or if it's a PDF, the page range, and again, the URL that you found it at. And then finally, a web page. Web pages are usually not good to use. You should normally avoid using them unless it is a high quality web page. That is something from like an educational institution or a nonprofit organization or a government body that is appropriate specifically to your topic. So if you're looking at comparing different countries in the modern world, you could find, for example, the CIA's World Factbook online. That would be entirely appropriate to use for many types of papers about modern countries. If you're looking for data, you might use information from either your state government's website or from the federal government's websites. That's entirely appropriate. You don't usually want to use some person's random website unless you're certain that it's really applicable to your topic and that the person knows what they're talking about. That is hard to determine sometimes. So be cautious with using web pages. There will be some instructors who tell you you can't use any. I'm not going to usually tell you that, but always follow assignment instructions. If there is no date given right away, that is probably a sign that it might not be a good source for you to use. But if you insist on using it, use N period, D period, no spaces between them, to mean non-dated. You need ideally the author, as with everything else. If there's no author, the sponsoring organization. So that might be the name of the college, like Emporia State University. It might be the name of a company, like Google. It might be the name of a government agency, like the U.S. Department of State. Give the title of the web page, or I shouldn't have put title 3 times there. Give the title of the web page and the title of the website. Some formats italicize the website. It's usually not italicized in Turabian unless it is similar to a print source. So a website that acts like an online newspaper, you probably would italicize that title. If you haven't already used the owner or sponsor information and you need to include it again, so you need to include it, then put that. And then finally, the URL. It may be a good idea to put the access date for a web page, particularly one that you think might change a lot, or one that you're not sure if it's going to stick around and you desperately still need to use it in your paper. Let's look at an example references page. So what I did here was I just found some sources that I either had on my computer or that I had books around my desk to use. And so let's first of all put this in the right format. Turabian actually is a little different in that its references page is supposed to be single spaced with a double space between each entry. So we'll fix that in a minute. The references page in Turabian, so Turabian has two different formats. One is called notes bibliography. That's when you use footnotes, which we aren't going to use in my class. The other is author date style, and that uses references for the last page. If I only had one reference, I would take off the S. It would just be a reference page. References need to be in alphabetical order by the last name of the author, and they need to be what's called a hanging indent. So let's do both of those using Word. Most of you watching this, or if you're in one of my classes, are probably at a university or a college where you have access to Office 365 or whatever Microsoft is now calling it, which means you have access as a student to Word. What we're going to do is we're going to first sort these. So I'm going to highlight everything that I have. And then to sort, I'm going to go to Home, and I'm going to go to my paragraph thingy, and where it says here AZ down arrow, if I hover my cursor over it, it says sort. So I'm going to click on that, sort by paragraph, and we want it to be in descending order, I believe. That's going to be from A to Z, I think. I might be backwards. I am backwards. My bad. So I'm going to Control Z to fix that, and I want it in ascending order to go from A to Z. That looks better. There is one issue. Notice here I have a source that doesn't have an author or an organization, so I've titled it by its title, which I've put in quotation marks. So this is in the wrong place. This needs to go with the C's. So I'm going to cut it out of here, and I'm going to put it with right before CAV would be CAT. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to again highlight all of my entries. And I have more entries than you are going to have in a class you take from me, just because I wanted to give lots of examples. I'm going to right click, or I could again go to this paragraph, this button right here at the bottom right of it. I like to right click, choose paragraph, go to special, and choose hanging. This gives me hanging indents, which are sometimes called outdents, which is what we want. And then I can also fix my spacing. So what I need to do here is I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to put my line spacing at single. I'm going to click this button, which is not clicked by default in Word. Don't add space between paragraphs of the same style. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to hit enter to get double spacing between entries. So for Turabian, each reference entry is single space, but it's double spaced between them. So it's going to look something like this. Other formats have different rules. The final thing I should do is remove all of my hyperlinks. We don't like them in Turabian. So to remove them, I can highlight them and right click and do remove hyperlink. And I was hoping I could do it for everything at once. I can't. I should be able to just go anywhere on it and hit remove. So I can just hover over it, remove, hover over it, remove. Notice for Turabian, URLs end with a period. Remove hyperlink, remove hyperlink. Let's look at some of these examples now. So our first reference entry is from a textbook. It has 4 authors. The first author's name is last name first, but all of the other authors are first name first. The author's names and middle initials are presented just as they're presented on the title page of the textbook. After the author's names is the year of the book. This one was from 2009. Then the title of the book has to be in italics. And then this wasn't the first edition, it was the 4th. So I have a period, and then I have 4th lowercase ed period. Notice my 4th is all on the line. When you type it in Word, it starts like this. It's going to look like this at first. We don't like that. So as soon as that happens in Word, just hit Control Z to undo it, and it will look just like it should. Then we need the place of publication. This is going to be the first U.S. city given. You might find that on the title page or on the copyright page. And then the title of the publisher exactly as given on the first page, even if you happen to know it has changed since then. Put whatever is on the first page. Leave out words like Inc. or corporation or company and stuff like that. The second one is from a newspaper article that I found online. So we have the author's name, and this one actually, I did this one wrong because it was from a different format. We should spell that name out. There we go. The year, the title of the newspaper article in quotation marks. Notice the title has to be capitalized. This is different from APA. So if you've used APA before, you know that titles, only the first word is capitalized. In Turabian, every important word is capitalized. Every word other than short prepositions and conjunctions, like to or and or a or an if they aren't the first word, are capitalized. Then in italics, the title of the newspaper. This newspaper calls itself the Gazette. It is a person reading it wouldn't know what Gazette it is or where it's from. So after I put in parentheses Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I could also have put it in parentheses in here like this. If I did it this way, I would make sure it was not italicized because it's not actually part of the newspaper's name. Either way is okay for me. And then even though I have the year here, I need the actual date of the article here. So June 22nd, 2020. And then I have the URL for it. Because I know that this particular paper's articles stay up at least for a while, I didn't put an access date. Underneath it, we have another example of a textbook. This is 2 authors with the same last name. Notice that here, this is unusual. This normally isn't like this, but it is in Turabian, really only in this situation. For 2 authors, we do put a comma before the and. We normally don't put a comma before an and if it's joining 2 things, but we do here. Then the year, the title of the book in italics, the edition, place of publication. Notice I didn't put a state for Boston. I did put a state for Stamford. I put CT for Connecticut. I always use the 2-letter abbreviation for the state, like you were writing a letter. Include the state if there is reasonable doubt that a person would know where that city was. So most educated people in the US, when they see Boston, would think Boston, Massachusetts. That's not the only Boston in the country, but it's the most common one. So if it is from Boston, Massachusetts, you could just call it Boston. Similarly, if it were from Chicago, you could just write Chicago. If it were from Minneapolis, you could write just Minneapolis, even though there is a Minneapolis, Kansas. But the assumption is probably Minneapolis, Minnesota. On the other hand, a place like Portland, there's a Portland, Oregon, there's a Portland, Maine. Both are fairly large. So that would be something where you might want to include, you would definitely want to include the name of the state if it weren't clear. Then I have a website, and this is a website I would normally not use in a paper, but for several reasons, but I wanted to just show you what a website might look like. So this is a website where we don't have a name and we don't have a specific sponsoring organization. It's clearly from Kenyon College because that's the website here. This was actually a site, a collection of class projects from this college. So I would not normally put a class project website as a source in a paper. That's not a good scholarly source for most types of papers, but I wanted to use this as an example. So here we have, there's no date given. I want to include an access date when I viewed it, and then again include the URL. The next one that follows, let me try to fix that quotation mark. It does not like that one. This is from History Today as a magazine, and this might confuse people if you were to look at this because it says volume with it, but it's a magazine, it's not a journal. So it's just an article by Richard Cavendish from 2009. So author's last name first, the year, title of the article in quotation marks, title of the source, because it's a magazine, comma, and then the full date, just like a newspaper, and then the URL. Here's another website, and again, this is just a gaming website that I personally go to. I would not normally cite it in a research type paper unless it was about gaming. But this was one of the front page articles recently, so I found it really quickly to cite. So again, author's name, year, title of the article. I don't think Turabian puts computer games in italics, but I'm just in that habit myself. Title, this would be a case where this is a website, so it's open to debate whether or not it should be italicized. I would mark it correct either way. It's a website that is similar to a blog, and blogs are always italicized. But it's not just a personal blog, or not even primarily that. So I'm not sure. So I think either way would work. The data was updated. This might be another one where I'd want to put the date that I accessed it. I know that this website though remains up to date. And then the specific URL to the site. There is another history book example. Here we have the example of the article that we had looked at before. So let me just show you how this looks on my paper. So we have our two authors, Eddie M. Gray and David O'Tall. And it's last name first, just for the first one, then comma, and then regular name order. The year, and notice the year is not in parentheses. It is an APA, but not Turabian. The title of the article is in italics. Notice originally, and let me fix this because this I typed wrong. That's my error. They had their own word in the title called proceptual. That is a word that they came up with. I would not use sick around that word in a title, I don't think, even though it is not technically a correctly spelled word. And you can't see this right now. There we go. Because they put it in quotation marks in their title. We normally don't do that to show something is misspelled, even if we make it up. But that's okay. I do want to show you how this looks for the journal here. So after the article title, the title of the journal is italicized. Then a space, and then the volume number, just the number by itself, nothing before it. 25, comma, NO period, space 2, and then in parentheses after it, the month. Sometimes a journal might give 2 months, like it might be called March-April, or it might be given a season like spring. You would type that in. Then the page range, and again, that stable URL. Here is another journal article, this one that does have a DOI. So this one is by these authors. So notice again, last name first for the first author, and the second author is in regular word order. This one was in 2015. Title of the article in quotation marks. Title of the journal italicized. This is volume 13, number 4. If the journal doesn't give, now notice here, let me zoom into this. You see here it says 13 parenthesis 4. That means this is the 4th issue of that year. And that's something that just sort of comes from lots of experience doing this, that we recognize that. So just be aware of that. Some APA uses that format, which is why they use this format, sort of. It's modified APA. If there's no number given, just ignore it. Don't write anything. Just skip over it. And then we have the page ranges, and then this one has a DOI. So we put it after this URL prefix, https://doi.org, and then slash and what the DOI is. And then finally, another book. I am not, in most of my classes, concerned that you are super accurate with following Turabian, but I want to see a good faith effort in either using Turabian or, again, in my lower division classes, freshman, sophomore classes, if not Turabian, then a MLA or APA, as long as you are consistent and you have these same sorts of things in a consistent way, it's going to be okay. The number one problem that students in my class run into, the number one problem why they do poorly on assignments, on writing assignments, is not because the Turabian is wrong, but because you don't do this. You have to cite your sources. If you do not cite your paraphrases, you will not pass the assignment. Make sure you cite your sources. Make sure you cite your sources. So in history, we use Turabian. This is what Turabian looks like. I'm going to end by showing you an example paper that I've written. It's not perfect by any means, but it gives an idea. All right, so this is a paper I wrote for a class in religious history that I took a couple years ago that uses Turabian. And most of the time I used footnotes, but here is one where I used the author date style. And this was a paper covering anti-Semitic attitudes in Scandinavia over the years. So what I want to show here is just, again, how this actually looks in a paper. Everything in this paragraph, other than this first sentence that ties it to what I've written before, everything else comes from this particular source, an article written by Kish in 1988, page 218. Notice I put it at the end of the paragraph there. On my next paragraph, I start with a particular fact about the Norwegian Constitution. Again, that comes from the same source, same page. I use the same site. Again, it's a new paragraph. And then I have information from another source. This is Hess in German, and they kept the German spelling of it, even though the article was in English for reasons that I don't quite understand. But again, this would be from 2015, page 13. Now, after this, the rest of this, including my typo here, is my own interpretation. Oh my goodness. I hope I edited this before I actually turned it in. Here again, we go on. The first part of here comes from Scott. And here I didn't use the year again because I introduced Scott before. I probably should have used the year again for both for Scott and Kent. Sometimes you don't have to do that if you're repeating the source over and over again, but it's usually a good idea too. So that was something that I should have probably done. The other thing I want to point out with these ideas is that our sources given, our parenthetical citations, are always part of the sentence. So notice here, or risk being fined, the period comes after the citation. So the citation is always, always, always part of the sentence. Anything else there? Typically, your conclusion will be your own thoughts entirely. So you would not have any citations there. But if for some reason you use an outside source in your conclusion, put a citation in. Here we have another example again of Turabian as the references page. From some different things. So I hope this helps with Turabian. Again, the big thing is cite your sources. Notice that it's not enough to just have like a list of URLs somewhere at the end of the page. Please don't do that. Actually cite your sources, cite them as you use them. It's okay to cite them more than once. Each time you use it, you should cite it. If you have any questions, please ask me. Also, you can ask a librarian at your institution, or you could possibly, if it's open as the time that we're doing this, you could use the Writing Center to get feedback on a paper, or ask them too for help with citations. So good luck as you do your writing.